G'day you beautiful people, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to take a look at my rework idea for Grim.exe. Before we get into the video, I'd like to start by saying that when I do these rework videos, I'll be looking through the character's history and at suggestions by community members. In some cases I will agree with those community members and go along with their ideas with maybe some minor tweaks. In some cases I will not use them, and in some of those cases I may provide feedback on that idea. Any feedback that is given is not an invitation to ridicule that person for their idea. I do not condone that behavior and instead ask that we be civil so that all of our ideas can potentially help to create something great. As far as my videos go, my intention is to be as inventive and out there as possible, but in a lot of instances I will be keeping parts of the hero's kits that I feel work very, very well and suit them. Going to include a passive for every hero, and I like the idea of having quests, so I will also be suggesting quests for each of their abilities and their passive, but not for their ultimate. Quests will be an objective that is given to an ability like hitting X amount of heroes with that ability, and upon completion will grant bonuses to that ability. Although I feel that with enough tweaking, all quests could be made available to each hero throughout the game, and I would be fine with that. I would prefer to see a system where the player chooses one quest for an ability per match, but they always have their quest for their passive. That way they have one more way of tailoring their build to their playstyle and to suit the way that they want to play, while also tailoring their build to potentially counter the enemy team. It's my opinion that quests should be difficult but attainable, and should also have strong rewards. However, I'm not opposed to just giving each hero one quest instead of 4, and I am aware that some of my quest suggestions may not even be possible due to tracking issues. With that said, let's get started. Okay, so I'm a very big fan of Grim. Even though a lot of people would argue that he was almost never viable, I've always thought that he is very good in the right hands. That said though, I'm going to suggest some potentially ridiculous changes to his kit in order to secure him as an anti-CC carry who has a touch of CC himself. I'm not expecting this rework to be very popular, especially at first. I suggest that Grim should keep his large hitbox, unlike what a lot of other people seem to think. I think a lot of people want his hitbox to move down to sort of maybe a little bit bigger than the next biggest carry in the game. But I don't feel that that's entirely necessary. I would prefer to change his kit and give him a strong kit so that he's a little bit tough to deal with. Now, it may seem like he will be weak because he has no damage ability, but I make the argument that if played well, nobody fighting him has an ability he can't stop. So to start off with, his basic attack will once again be called Pulse Cannon, have a 0.92 power scaling, which is lower than the standard of Murdoch, but he will have a way to buff that with his passive, or at least buff his actual basic attack damage. So I had two ideas for Grim's passive, but I was convinced, very aggressively convinced, to save my favorite of the two for another character. So Grim's passive will be called Escalation Protocol, and it works like this. Every time Grim blocks or cancels an enemy ability, his basic attack damage is increased by 2, and bonus damage is lost upon death. Blocking will be via the Deflector Shield, which is returning, and cancels will be via his new ultimate. The quest for the ability reads, after reaching 20 stacks, bonus damage is no longer lost upon death. This passive will allow him to get stronger if enemies don't respect his role. As far as numbers go, maybe that's a little bit imbalanced or a little bit weak, a little bit strong, I don't know. Numbers aren't hugely important, it's mainly just the ideas that are important. So moving on to his first actual ability, and that'll be, as we just talked about, the returning Deflector Shield. I've chosen not to make any changes to the way Deflector Shield works, so it still works exactly as you remember it. However, the quest for the ability will increase his ability to block by halving its cooldown after blocking 25 abilities. This will allow him to constantly block abilities and make it easier for him to achieve max stacks on his passive. So, like I just said, all of the stats themselves will be pretty much exactly the same. As far as the wiki reads, it is different because the wiki actually reads that Grim activates a 2-second shield that blocks the next incoming ability, but I myself and someone that I spoke to about this last night, we're kind of both in agreement that we don't think that it was ever 2 seconds. It seems more like it was 1. So if it was in fact 2 seconds, and it just never seemed like 2 seconds, then that's fine. Cooldowns are the same, and the mana that you get back on Deflect the Shield is exactly the same, works exactly the same as it used to. Okay, so next up is another returning ability, which is called Suppression Mode. Suppression Mode will also not be changing, but it will be made more effective once again by the quest, which reads, after slowing enemies 50 times, Suppression Mode's mana cost is halved. It may seem a little bit strong, but my whole argument for all this stuff is that by not reducing Grim's hitbox, he does need some buffs, so I don't really feel like this is going to be too drastic. But once again, like Deflect Shield, all works exactly the same way. You toggle it on, Pulse Cannon attacks use 10, 15, 20, 25 mana based on what level it's at, and it slows by 30, 35, 40, 45. I have actually reduced that a little bit because I think it was 30, 36, 42, 48. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I did bring that down a little bit. And the duration was actually listed at 0.8 seconds before with a 1 second cooldown. So there was like, you hit them with it, they're slowed for 0.8 of a second. For the next 0.2 of a second, they speed back up to normal, and then you can shoot them again. But I don't know whether that's really that necessary, to have that, fraction of a second where they speed back up again. Considering the fact that it's on a 1 second cooldown and it lasts for a second, you still do have to land that shot the moment that it comes off cooldown to create a continuous slow. So I don't really feel like that's a big of an issue, but I'm okay with changing that if necessary. Okay, so next up we have his first new ability, and it's called Anti-Gravity Orb. It will work the same way that Displacement Blast did. It's practically the same thing, but with a different effect when it hits the ground. So normally with Displacement Blast, where it hit the ground, it would push enemies in a direction away from it. It was very, very unreliable, and I'm not sure that the devs will be able to fix it. I like to assume that Epic tried to fix it, and maybe they just couldn't. Who knows? Maybe Unleashed can get this to work, and work well, and if that was the case, I'd be totally cool with it. I also had the idea of keeping Displacement Blast, but having it as a straight line projectile that pushed things out of its way, which would also be pretty cool. If anyone thinks that Displacement Blast should stay, I am pretty cool with it being a straight line projectile. Maybe a slower moving one that pushes things out of its way, because I think that would be a lot more reliable than having Displacement Blast the way that it used to be and not being able to rely on it. Okay, so Grim lobs that orb that creates a 600 unit AoE that knocks up enemies that pass through it. The effect activates after 2 seconds and remains for 3 seconds after activation. So, like I said, it'll fire exactly like Displacement Blast. You'll lob out an orb, and where it hits the ground, the enemies and your teammates, everyone will be able to see the area of effect on the ground. 2 seconds after it hits the ground and it's visible, it will actually activate, and anyone that touches that area will be knocked up for around about 0.75 of a second. I'm not fixed on any sort of numbers with that. Maybe a lower duration of the knock-up would be better, but it would then work in a way that once you've been knocked up, you can't get knocked up unless you exit and come back in. I'm normally against carries having CC abilities, but I think that in Grim's case you need to make the argument that this ability actually fits thematically. Anti-Gravity Orb will also be able to be buffed via its quest, which reads, after knocking up 20 enemies, the AoE range is increased to 800. Now I know that this may seem strong, but given that the enemy has 2 seconds to get out of that area of effect, I feel that it's kind of balanced. I also like that it adds some synergy with him and other members of his team. Okay, so it's time for his ultimate, and I'd like to start by saying that although I have made this ability read like a joke, I am actually saying that he should have an ult that employs the mechanics I'm about to mention, excluding the joke, maybe. Okay, so here it is. Grim's ultimate will be called, and I'm not set on the name either, crank it up to 11. Grim.exe blasts Ariana Grande from his speakers in a cone in front of him. Any enemy subjected to that noise pollution is silenced for 6 seconds. Now, apologies to any Ariana Grande fans, but come on. Okay, so the way that it works is that he projects a cone shape in front of him, kind of like the way that Grux's smash and grab works. When it's activated, every enemy that it touches is silenced for 6 seconds, meaning that they can't cast any abilities, and any ongoing abilities are cancelled. Now, this won't cancel things like Decker's Cage. You won't be able to use this on Decker's Cage or on Decker when a cage is already out, because it's not really it's not an ongoing ability that's coming off of them, and it's not a channel that's going on, but it will cancel things like Sereth's ultimate, because, she's in that demon form. You will take her out of that demon form. It'll cancel things like Richter's Electrocute, where he has the AoE damage around him. It'll cancel Grux's ultimate. Grim's ultimate. Christ. It'll cancel Grux's ultimate, so he'll lose that bonus damage. It'll take Rampage out of his ultimate form, things like that. So these cancels will add to his passive stacks, but silenced enemies that didn't have an ability cancelled do not count towards those stacks. So that's Grim. I know it's a very out there suggestion, but honestly, I really like the idea of having a hero that can basically counter everything. You can make the OP argument, but I'd argue that a massive hitbox and clever use of abilities can still shut him down. You could also argue that he's too weak because he has no damage ability. But if we take a 1v1, for example, the enemy has no abilities either. Say they have a movement ability, suppression mode. They have a stun or a high damage ability, deflector shield. They have an engagement tool. You have an anti-gravity orb. They have any ability. You have his ultimate to silence them so they can't use them. He would be one of those carries that Countess would not enjoy trying to delete. Most carries, when they build well, could delete a Countess in 6 seconds. So if she's dumb enough to come straight up on you and you get that silence off, Countess is no longer an issue. You'd have ways to deal with people like Morogesh. He would be very good at what he does. He'd make tanks think twice about diving into the backline to wipe the carry out. He'd punish people for using abilities and use that to scale better in the late game. Obviously, when it comes to balancing from then on, because of the fact that his kit sort of revolves around cancelling other people's things and then gaining basic damage off it, could just be a matter that his power scaling then just needs to be dropped down a little bit to make him not too stupid. Because I am suggesting that the bonus damage that he gets is applied before things like crit bonuses. So he will be pretty strong. But then again, it's his turn to be bloody strong. So anyway, that's my ridiculous suggestion for Grim.exe, and I cannot wait to hear your opinions on it. I hope you enjoyed the videos, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for watching. I love your face, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.